Pour la dernière partie de cette 8e édition de Futurapolis. J'ai des sanglots dans la voix, mais vous allez voir, on vous a réservé un très bel après-midi. Je rappelle que vous allez découvrir, je rappelle pour ceux qui n'étaient pas là, évidemment, une atmosphère différente, un code couleur qui va vous indiquer à quelle thématique la table ronde ou la keynote ou la démonstration se rapporte. On va commencer avec la couleur bleue pour Futuragora. Alors c'est le thème c'est là où se jouent les luttes de pouvoir de demain, avec notamment l'avènement des fake news, la démocratie directe, la vie privée, comment est-ce qu'on reprend la main, est-ce qu'on lutte pour notre souveraineté collective et individuelle. La deuxième couleur, ce sera le violet pour Futurapolis, là où se construisent les modes de vie de demain, transport, loisirs, travail, consommation. Notre quotidien ne ressemble en rien à celui de nos aînés, de quoi seront faites nos journées dans 10, 50 ou 100 ans. Alors ça, c'était Futuragora. Il faut que je vous explique parce qu'en ce moment, on a un stagiaire qui est très sympa, mais il a une petite tendance à garder ses moufles. Donc là, il a pris un petit peu de retard. Futurapolis, je viens de vous en parler, sur la couleur violette. Donc c'est ce que je vous disais, je vais me répéter de quoi seront faites nos journées dans 50 ou 100 ans. Et enfin, la couleur rouge pour Futura mythologie, là où s'écrivent et se défont les mythes de demain, nouvelles utopies, futurs souhaitables et bobards à grande échelle. Les grands récits de demain vont s'enraciner dès aujourd'hui. Il est temps de les questionner. Alors je vous invite à nouveau, si ce n'est pas fait, à nous solliciter, à intervenir, à échanger avec nos invités via le hashtag Futurapolis. Et on fait un coucou à ceux qui nous suivent sur le Facebook Live du Point. Vous pourrez poser vos questions en direct aux invités à la fin de la plupart des tables rondes. On a choisi de débuter cet après-midi en vous faisant un petit peu plaisir avec de la magie. Alors les femmes coupées en deux, des cartes qui surgit brusquement d'un chapeau, un éléphant qui disparaît d'une pièce. On sait que c'est faux et pourtant on tombe dans le panneau. Telle est la force des meilleurs magiciens au monde. Alors notre invité est un véritable magicien. Il est aussi professeur de psychologie. Il est très réputé. Il viendra vous livrer sur scène une performance unique. Il va vous expliquer tout de suite pourquoi vous croyez encore à la magie. Alors cette session est en anglais. Merci de vérifier que vous avez bien récupéré votre petit outil. Vous mettez l'oreillette tous ensemble dans un geste de fraternité, de concorde et d'union nationale, évidemment. C'est bon, tout le monde est prêt? Allez, foin de blabla, voici Gustave Kuhn, docteur en psychologie, magicien, directeur du Magic Lab. Applaudissements, mesdames, messieurs.
Bonjour. Bonjour, je peux pas parler français, alors c'est en anglaise. Good afternoon. Do you remember the first time you saw a magic trick? That may have been your uncle making a coin appear from behind your ears, or a silly trick like this. I love magic, and I've spent most of my life dedicated to this mysterious world of deception and illusions. In the first part of my career, I performed magic simply to entertain people. However, for the last 15 years or more, I've been using magic as a way of exploring the mysteries of the human brain. And I direct the Magic Lab at Goldsmiths, where we use magic as a way of exploring wide ranges in science. We study misdirection and mind control techniques to learn more about consciousness and the illusion of free will. We use these principles to apply magic in other contexts. So, for example, we are currently running a project in which we are training robots to perform magic tricks to see what will happen once computers and artificial intelligence starts deceiving us. But don't worry, I know this sounds very scary and may reduce the amount of time that we're spending on this planet, but we're also finding ways in which we can use magic as a way of enhancing people's well-being, so at least we'll all die very happily. But what I would like to do today is explore some of the psychological tricks that magicians use to create the illusion of the impossible. And what better place to start than by performing you the magic trick that I remember seeing as a kid when I was small. So I'd like to show you this trick, and it's fairly simple. It uses a rope like this, and it's called the cut and restored rope. The idea is very simple. I cut the rope in half, once like this, leaving me with two identical kind of similar pieces. So, what you do. You know what? I'll show you something completely different, okay? Now, did you know that if you got a rope and you take these two ends of the rope, this actually leaves you with a rope with no beginning and no end. But to be honest, there's not that much I can do with this, so let's just take these two ends and start all over again. So, as I said before, this is known as the cut and restored rope. The idea is really simple. You cut the rope in half once, twice. It doesn't matter how many times you take either rope, put it in top, et voila, the rope is restored. Thank you. Let's do a little quiz. If I cut the rope up here and one more time down here, how many pieces of rope do I end up with? 3, 2, 4. Should we count? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay? Now watch very carefully. If I take some magic dust from the right side, not from the left, but from the right, sprinkle it over these ropes, watch what happens. I end up with a short piece of rope, a medium length rope, and a long piece of rope. Now, as I said before, it's very important to take the magic dust from the right side, because if you take it from the left and sprinkle it over these ropes, they all become of equal length again. You're looking very confused. You're looking very, very confused. But don't worry. I know it doesn't look like it, but I don't actually have real supernatural powers. Of course, what I'm using is psychological tricks to hijack your brain. And I'm using these tricks to manipulate how you perceive the world. And the kind of tricks that magicians use are actually very similar to kind of tricks that the brain plays on you in everyday life. It's just, in reality, it's just in normal life, we generally mistake the illusion of reality for reality. And so, as a magician, all I'm really doing is I'm pointing out this discrepancy between the illusion in your mind and the reality out here. But of course, to do so, I often lie. So right at the beginning, you all thought I messed up this trick. I didn't, okay? I've performed this trick hundreds of times. That was just used to create a bit of drama. Similarly, when I was telling you it's important to take the magic dust from the right side, that was a lie as well, because actually the dust from the left works just as well. And even now, as I'm telling you, I've got 1, 2, 3 equal length of rope. Of course, I am lying through my teeth, because in reality, one of them is short. This one right here is a medium one, and this one right here is a long piece of rope. Thank you very much. So, this all involved lots of lying and deception. I'm now going to switch roles really into the science of what I'm telling you now. Well, at least I'm not trying to lie to you right now. So I directed the Magic Lab at Goldsmiths, and magic deals with some of the most fundamental psychological and philosophical questions. It deals with consciousness, deception, free will, belief, and yet, unlike most other art forms, magic has received far less outside attention. However, for the last 15 years or more, scientists and magicians have started to come together to try and use scientific approaches to study magic, because by understanding why your brains are so easily fooled into experiencing the impossible, we can actually learn a lot about how the human brain works. And so what I would like to do this afternoon is explore some of these tricks that magicians use to create the illusion of impossibility. But let's start off by looking at the experience of magic. As a psychologist, I think of magic as creating a conflict in beliefs. You all know that magic is not possible, and you all know that it's impossible for me to magically restore a piece of rope. And yet, that's exactly what you've just experienced. And so from a psychological perspective, magic creates a conflict between the things you believe to be possible and the things that you've just experienced. A few years ago, we carried one of the first neuroimaging studies on magic, in which we used a neuroimaging scanner to scan people's brains whilst they watched a whole range of magic tricks, and we try and understand what are the neurological mechanisms that underpin this unique experience of magic. And the results are very surprising, because what I have here is a diagram of our brain, and there's two main areas that became activated. And what's very interesting about this is that these are areas that are generally involved in us processing cognitive conflict. And so what these results suggest then is that at the core of magic is an illusion of impossibility. And by experiencing the impossible, you're creating a conflict in your brain between the things you believe to be possible and the things that you've just experienced. But when I started, I told you that I don't have supernatural powers. And so how can I trick your brain into experiencing the impossible? Well, the way that magicians do this is by exploiting some rather counterintuitive and very surprising psychological tricks. And so what I would like to do now is explore some of these tricks. How many of you would like to make a rabbit disappear? Yeah? Should we try? Are you all ready? This is one of the most amazing illusions, so be prepared to be astonished. Now, you should all have a little piece of paper like this. Have you all got one of these? So take out that piece of paper. We're all going to use it. And on the side here, we've got a cross and a hat with a rabbit inside. And we are now jointly going to make that hat with the rabbit disappear. So follow my instructions. Hold out the piece of paper at arm's length, about like this. Close the left eye. And keep your eye on that black dot, or the black cross. So keep your eye on the cross, and then don't move your eyes, but just bring the piece of paper closer and closer, and at some point, if you don't move your eyes, that rabbit is going to disappear, and the hat. For me, it's gone now, completely gone. If you move your eyes, the rabbit will come back, but if you're holding it in the right location, that rabbit should disappear. Are you all getting that illusion? Yeah? Are you a little bit disappointed? Were you hoping for a bit more? Now, I promised a really astonishing illusion, and I know some of you may be slightly disappointed. But, as with a lot of these tricks, the explanation, the psychological mechanism that underpin them is actually far more amazing than the tricks themselves. So let's take a look at why this illusion works. And to understand this, we have to take a quick look at how our visual system encodes information. This is a diagram of our eye, and we've got the world out here, which is projected through the lens here onto the retina, which is at the back of our eyes. And the retina is covered in thousands of little photoreceptors that encode all of the visual information and send it through the optic nerve, this one over here, to the brain for further processing. The human eye is one of the most amazing organs, but there's a very weird fault. In that, since all the neurons have to leave the retina, it leaves us with a huge gap where the optic nerve is. And so what this means is that there's no photoreceptors by the optic nerve. So any information that projects onto the optic nerve simply won't be encoded, and we'll be blind to it. And so the reason why that rabbit disappears is that once you get the geometry right, and the rabbit projects onto that blind spot, we don't have any information, and hence you'll be blind to it. Does that make sense? But I promised you a miracle, didn't I? Here's the amazing bit. How many of you have noticed this blind spot? You've experienced it. I've told you why it occurs, and yet we're oblivious to it. It's here. It's right here, about that big. And although I know it's there, we don't see it. But The blind spot is only one of these many fields of darknesses. Let's explore another one, which is even bigger. How many of you have ever seen your own eyes move? You can't. If you don't believe me, try this next time you go to the toilet. Stand in front of the mirror, look to the left, then look to the right, and try and spot your eyes move. You simply can't. If you can, send me an email and I'll send you £1,000 or euros in the post. It's simply impossible. And the reason why we are blind during each of these eye movements makes a lot of evolutionary sense, because anyone who's tried to take a picture with a moving camera will know that you end up with a very blurry image, and therefore you end up with useless information. And so rather than spending expensive cognitive resources processing this blurry information, our brain simply shuts down. And it shuts down for about 1/10 of a second, so about 100 milliseconds. And so what this means is that every time you move your eyes, you are blind for about 1/10 of a second. Now again, I can see you all think, well, that's not that much. Well, let's do the maths. We move our eyes about 3 times per second, which means every day you make about 150,000 eye movements. Work it out yourself. That means that you are blind for literally 4 hours per day. That is a quarter of your day you are living in darkness, and yet most of us are completely oblivious to this darkness. Isn't that astonishing? A quarter of your time. Even now, as you're trying to pay attention to what I'm saying, a quarter of the time, your visual system is offline and you're not actually perceiving anything. These are some of the tricks that the eyes play on us. And the tricks that the brain play on us are even more astonishing. As I'm looking out here, I feel like I'm aware of most of the things that are going on around me. I feel I've got fairly good observational skills. I mean, how observant do you think you are? Who thinks they are a very observant person? Hands up. Not now. I've kind of scared you. I think I've scared you all. Medium observer. Really rubbish observer. Too shy to try and account for it. Well, my intuition is that we should actually be pretty good at observing these things. But again, that is an illusion, and it's an illusion I would like to break. What we're going to do now is we're going to play a little game. This is, I don't know what it's called in French. In English, it's called Spot the Difference. You may have played this as a kid, where you have 2 different pictures, and you simply have to spot the difference between the pictures. We're going to play the same game, so spot the difference, but the slight change is that rather than presenting the pictures next to each other, I'm going to cycle through the images. So you're going to see one and then the changed image. And what I would like you to do is hold up your hand once you spot the difference. Are you ready? Yep. Okay, let's go. Come on. We've got a few. Don't shout out the answer if you see it. A few more. Anybody who hasn't seen it, have a look at the painting up here. Ah, can you see it all? Up here? The painting? So, this is a phenomena known as change blindness, and intuitively this should be really simple, because all you're trying to do is you're trying to having to compare 2 different images. And yet we find this very, very difficult, unless of course you know what's changed. I mean, now that I've pointed out the difference, it's completely obvious, and you go, well, how could I have missed this in the first place? And yet it's very, very hard. So what this illustrates is that our conscious perception and memory of the world is far more limited than we intuitively believe it to be. And this may seem rather artificial, but I can give you a more real-world example. This is a lovely study that was carried out by Levin and Simons back in the 1990s on an American campus. And what you'll see here is an experimenter wearing blue talking to a participant. She is clearly having a look at the person. They're engaged in conversation. And yet, she completely fails to notice that the person has changed. Now, you might think this can only happen in America. It doesn't. We carried out studies, or at least a PhD student of mine, at Spitalfield Market in London, where we changed a person for a mannequin, and most people did not notice that they were talking to a mannequin. So intuitively think, well, surely we should be able to see these kinds of things, yet in reality we don't. So how does this link to magic? Well, magic is all about exploiting lots of these limitations, and as a scientist, I'm interested in studying the principles that magicians exploit to learn more about human perception. And one of the principles that's key to magic is the principle of misdirection, which relates to this idea that we can manipulate your attention and therefore manipulate what you see and what you miss. And so what I would like to do now is do a little live science demonstration. Usually when magicians say they are doing an experiment, they're never sure whether it works or not, but that means they're lying. Here, I really don't know whether this is going to work, so you have to bear with me. I'm just going to change these screens slightly. I'd like to also introduce you at this point to my eye tracker here. I'll show you this later, but hopefully this will allow you to see a little bit more of what I am doing. Can you all see me here? You can see me on the screen as well. Again, I'm going to show you a short magic trick. Just going to move over here. Like that. Can you all see me on the screen? It's pretty quick. Gone. How many of you do not see how the lighter disappeared? Yeah, quite a few of you. Do you want to see it again? Yeah, I need another lighter. Got another one just about down here. I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. No. Hold on, don't do that ah moment. Okay, remember that ah moment. That's very, very important. Did you all see it this time? I did exactly the same thing. Is exactly the same. So let me talk you through this. We use these types of paradigms to study misdirection. And it's not a real magic trick because magicians wouldn't really do this. But I'm using lots of different misdirection cues. So I'm lighting the lighter here. That creates a bright spark, which will hopefully capture your attention. I'm using my hand to guide your attention from the lighter over here. I'm also using my gaze, so where I'm looking to misdirect your attention. This is the point at which I'm going to be dropping it. So I'm using lots of different cues. You can hear the sound, the movement, my eye gaze, everything put together to prevent you from actually seeing it drop right here. Now, I asked you to remember that ah moment, because that's important. Because again, like with a lot of these other blind spots, we are oblivious to these blind spots. You think that surely you should be able to see these kinds of things because they're happening right in front of your eyes, and yet you simply don't. So we study misdirection by using eye tracking. And I would now like to just give you a quick example of what this looks like. Boris, would you mind helping me out? Please give Boris a big hand. So again, this is where I'm never sure whether it's actually going to work or not. So this is the eye tracker that we use, and it's like a pair of glasses. So Boris, if you could just put this on like that. Great. So we've got one camera here that is, maybe if you just move your head down a bit so you can see. Can you all wave? Yeah, you just about see it. So we've got camera there, which is going to film what Boris sees. And then we've got another camera here, which is filming Boris's eyes. So there's this tiny camera right here. Try and adjust it a little bit like that. And so what you can see is that the eye tracker is now locking on to Boris's pupil, and it can work out the rotation of the eye inside the eye socket. That that's not that useful. What I really want to know is where Boris is looking. So I'm going to do a quick calibration. So Boris, I'm going to show you some dots on here. Just look at the dots. So what's happening now, you can't see it on this screen, but as dots are appearing on the screen, and I'm basically calibrating Boris's eye rotation to physical points in space. And you should see it back now. So Boris, can you just face me for a moment? Great, and you can see now the eye tracker is tracking where Boris is looking. And I can now perform some magic tricks. And we can use this as a way of studying how misdirection works. And of course, the really useful thing about this tool is that I don't have to ask anybody where they are looking or what they are seeing. I can simply use this type of eye tracking technology to investigate why people are so easily misdirected. Thank you very much, Boris. So I'm going to remove this from you like this. Now, of course, all of this is a lot of fun, but there's a very serious side to all of this research. And one of the really intriguing things that we've discovered through eye tracking is that quite often people can actually be looking at something and yet they still don't see it. Intuitively think that, well, surely if I'm looking at something, I should be consciously aware of it. And yet that's not the case. So quite often we have people who are looking at the lighter being dropped, and yet they just don't see it. And the reason for this is that there's lots of mental attentional processes that further select the information that is of importance. And so unless you're actually attending to something, you simply won't be able to see it. And this, of course, has got important implications. So think about driving. Driving is a very weird task where you're having to do all of this complicated stuff at the same time. So having to drive whilst keeping your eyes on the road and the cars in front of you is very attentionally demanding. Which is why it's not a good idea to talk to someone on a mobile phone, because of course talking to someone on a mobile phone, you look at the phone and it'll distract your attention. But here's the problem, because in the UK we are allowed to use hands-free sets. But what this research is demonstrating is that even if you're using a hands-free set, which allows you to look at the cars in front of you, if your attention is being misdirected or distracted, you still won't be able to see the things in front of you. Which is why driving whilst talking to someone on a hands-free phone is just as dangerous as it is on a handheld phone. In fact, recent studies have shown that driving whilst talking to someone on a phone is as detrimental to your driving as driving whilst being legally drunk. And yet, we're not aware of this. And this is because a lot of these illusions are very surprising. And so understanding why our brains are tricked by these illusions has important implications for current research as well as future research. So think about like Google Glasses, for example, this idea that we should be able to navigate through the world whilst reading our text messages. Well, all of the research that we are illustrating through misdirection tells us that this is a really, really bad idea. So, now that I've illustrated that you are oblivious to most of the things around you, well, I'm going to further burst this bubble of you as being good observers by destroying the idea that you actually can trust the things that you can see. Have a look at this picture here. What do you see? A duck? A rabbit or a duck? It may switch. It can switch. This is a picture known as a bistable image. And either you can see this as the beak, so you can see this as the beak, and you can see it as a duck, or you can see the back as the ears of the rabbit, and then you'll see it as a rabbit. You'll switch between the two. You never see both at the same time, but they will always switch. What's interesting about this image is that although the world isn't changing around us, your visual perception of the world is. So what this tells us is that the way that you are perceiving the world is not necessarily related to the current state of the world, but is actually how your brain interprets the world. So perception is all about your brain making guesses, making assumptions, trying to work out what the world actually is. It's a very complex process. But because perception is all about guesswork and interpretation, it means we can start playing around with it and we can change your perceptual experiences. Have a look at these two tables. Which of these tables is wider, the one on the left or the one on the right? The one on the right looks a lot wider. In actual fact, they are exactly the same surfaces. And I can demonstrate this by removing some of the context. I'm going to get rid of the legs. I'm now going to rotate it, and you can see that they are exactly the same. As I add the context, they look very different. Isn't that astonishing? You know that they are physically the same, and yet, because your brain interprets these shapes in the given context, it means that you're actually perceptually experiencing them very differently. Now, this is shape. You might think that's as simple. How many of you remember this image here? Yeah? An image that nearly broke the internet. Because some people see this as black. Who sees this as black? Some people see it as gold. And nobody understood why. I think of this as, in the UK, I think of this as the Brexit illusion, because it's one of these illusions that really divided our nation. But because, of course, even color, something that we take for granted, is a purely psychological construct. And it's a very subjective experience, and the way that you perceive color is heavily dependent on how you actually interpret things. Let me demonstrate this. Here, I've got a cube with different colors. What's the color of this square down here? Orange. And this one up here? Brown. Again, this is kind of like the antidote to Brexit, because everybody agrees on this. The problem is that you're all wrong. Because in actual fact, they're exactly the same. It's exactly the same color. It's a beautiful illusion by Bo Lotto. And I'm going to demonstrate this by removing, again, some of the context. I'm going to cover parts of the image. And you can see the more I cover, the more similar they look. They are actually physically identical. And yet, once I add the context, again, they look completely different. Isn't that astonishing? You know that they're the same, and yet your brain simply can't perceive them as the same. And again, this is because your brain doesn't simply passively observe the world. It uses clever tricks and assumptions about the world to give you a reliable estimate. So here, this square here is presented amongst lots of, in a shaded area, which gives you a good indication that it was probably going to be orange rather than brown, whilst the square up there is presented amongst highly illuminated squares, so your brain simply assumes that it's going to be brown. And so the brain does a lot of clever guesswork, and a lot of this guesswork is very important for us to be able to make sense of the world around us, but it does mean that it can be tricked. But I'd like to end up with one of the most astonishing illusions. Are you ready for this? This illusion, I think, is going to fry your mind. And I'm going to show you a magic trick first, because I like doing this with magic. I'm going to show you the magic trick, and then I'll explain you why this illusion works. So, are you ready? Go on. How many of you saw the ball disappear somewhere up here? Yeah, some of you? This is a very interesting illusion, first actually investigated by a guy called Norman Triplett in 1900. And this is the way it works. So I throw the ball once, twice, and on the final throw, I'll just pretend to throw it up when in fact it's held here. What's interesting about this illusion is that a lot of people actually experience a ball as moving up and then disappearing up here. So they are experiencing something that hasn't actually happened. So, why does this occur? To understand the illusion, we have to take a closer look at how the brain processes visual information. This is a diagram of the visual system. We already looked at the way that our eyes encode visual information. It's then sent through the optic nerve to different parts of the cortex, which are responsible for perception. So, although our eyes capture the visual information, all of the seeing, so the perception, happens inside the brain. And it takes a bit of time, as you can see in this diagram, for the information to travel from the eyes to the brain. It takes about 1/10 of a second. Now, 1/10 of a second might not sound much, but it's got major implications. Because what does that mean for your perception? Well, it means that our perception should be lagging by about 1/10 of a second. So by the time you've seen something, it's already happened. And again, you might think 1/10 of a second is not that much, but as I'm walking here at about 1 meter per second, that would mean that the world should be lagging behind me by about 10 centimeters. And yet, it simply doesn't. And so, how then can we compensate for this delay? It's a bit like with a thunderstorm. So with a thunderstorm, you've got the thunder and the lightning happening at the same time, and yet, of course, because sound travels much slower than light, we see a gap between, we perceive a gap between the sound and the light. It's the same for our conscious experience. Well, the way that our brain compensates for this is by predicting the future. So what you're seeing as the now isn't actually the now. What you're seeing as the now is your brain using information from the past to predict the present. And without doing so, tasks such as catching a ball would simply be impossible. If I weren't predicting the future, I'd constantly be bumping into things. And so your brain is continuously predicting the future. And it means that you are literally seeing the future. We are all able to see into the future. Isn't that remarkable? And so the reason why the vanishing ball illusion works is that you are tricked into seeing something that hasn't actually happened. It's a bit like with a dog. When you've got a dog and you pretend to throw a stick, the dog runs, even though you didn't throw the stick. But the same is true for our conscious perception as well. But of course, we use these tricks to enable us to interact with a very complex world. So, studying these illusions has got far-reaching implications in wide aspects of technology and society. So a lot of the work that we do on misdirection has got major implications for our current and future technologies. Is it a good idea to present people with vast amounts of information that may be distracting them from the real task? Well, probably not. Think about law and litigation. So our court of law heavily relies on eyewitness testimonies, yet, of course, what we are illustrating here is that you're oblivious to most of the things that are going on around us, and so how can we trust someone's eyewitness account? The illusions I've looked at here are purely perceptual illusions. We are also studying a whole bunch of illusions of free will as well. So even though we cherish this idea of being in control of our thoughts and our actions, it actually turns out that a lot of these experiences are just as susceptible to illusions as our conscious experiences as well. So I hope you found this interesting. If you're interested in learning more about the way that magic is used to highlight a lot of these illusory perceptions, have a look at my recent book, Experiencing the Impossible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bravo, Gustave. On vous remercie chaleureusement pour ce brillant numéro. C'est le moment où on fait une pause de quelques minutes. On se retrouve dans quelques instants, le temps de quelques réglages techniques.
C'est bon, ça vous va pas mal?
Ah oui, vous voulez vous...
C'est bon, vous êtes bien installés?
Impeccable, merci beaucoup.
Vous êtes prête? Je suis prête. Alors vous allez choisir.
Merci.